welcome back to Barn and Soul, where farming meets heart, history, and all the rare and wonderful corners of the living world. I'm Kendall, here from Dalby Farm in Scituate, Massachusetts, where most of the animals are technically livestock, but nobody told them that. They're just themselves, stubborn goats, opinionated geese, chickens with main character energy, and a lot of heritage breeds who have no idea they're carrying centuries of human history in their DNA. You've probably heard the famous Jacques Cousteau quote, "People protect what they love," right? His grandson, Fabian, has added a little extension I really like, which is people protect what they love what they understand, and they understand what they are taught. That right there pretty much sums up this entire episode in 3 lines. Because if conservation was only about information, we'd be fine. We have the charts, we have the graphs, we have the "this species is critically endangered" labels. But facts alone don't move people. Love does. So today we're going to talk about why. Why do we save what we love? Why are some animals and places easy to care about and others are almost invisible? And maybe, most important, how do we actually build that connection on purpose for ourselves, for our kids, and for the creatures who do not have a PR department? Before we dive in, as always, we're going to ground ourselves in some fast facts. These are your pause and let this sink in section. People who feel more connected to nature are consistently more likely to recycle, conserve energy, donate to environmental causes, and support pro-environment policies. A meta-analysis of over 30 studies found a reliable link between nature connectedness and pro-environmental behavior. Empathy with nature isn't just a nice feeling, it predicts real behavior. A 2025 study found that people who felt more empathy toward nature were significantly more likely to support conservation policies and take public actions like signing petitions or backing habitat protections, according to Science Direct. Childhood nature experiences matter for life. According to the BES journals and another source I can't read properly, reviews of decades of research show that kids who have frequent positive contact with nature, not just one big trip, right, but everyday routine contact, are more likely to grow into adults who care about conservation and act on it. And the Livestock Conservancy reminds us heritage breeds aren't just cute old-fashioned farm animals. They are primary reservoirs of genetic diversity for their species. The Livestock Conservancy notes that up to half a breed's biodiversity may exist nowhere else in the species. So, losing a breed can literally mean losing unique traits like disease resistance or heat tolerance, for example, that future agriculture might desperately need. And last up, emotional connection to places changes how communities respond to climate and environmental change. So when people feel a strong sense of place, this doesn't seem far-fetched, right? They are more willing to adapt, protect, and organize to preserve those landscapes. It's not just a nice quote, people protect what they love. It actually shows up in the data. So let's talk about what's going on under the hood, shall we? There's a term you may hear in conservation circles. It's kind of strange. Biophilia. The idea, popularized by biologist E.O. Wilson, that humans have an innate affinity for other living things. Now, whether that's 100% built in or shaped by experience, the short version is our brains are wired to notice life, to orient toward it, to feel something when we're around it. Modern conservation psychology uses a more specific concept, nature connectedness, right? How much we feel that nature is part of who we are. It isn't just, I like trees. It's, I see myself as someone who is part of the natural world that includes trees. And that identity in turn will shape behavior. A 2019 meta-analysis, and remember, I have all of my sources listed in the description of this episode, always, just to be clear, but a 2019 meta-analysis looked at dozens of studies and found that people with higher nature connectedness were more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors like conserving water, cutting waste, supporting local parks, and trying to make climate-friendly choices. More recently, researchers have argued that we should be building conservation strategies around the emotional bond and not treating it as an afterthought. A 2024 paper in Frontiers in Conservation Science suggests taking a biophilia-based approach, leaning into love, awe, and connection as central tools rather than hoping fear or guilt will carry the message. And let me tell you, here on the farm, I see this in real time. There is a marked difference in the response I get. So if someone comes in and says, "Oh, animals, neat," and I go and say, "Yeah, that guy, he's about to go extinct and we'll never see anything like him ever again," they're like sad. They're, confused. Maybe they feel attacked. Like, should I be doing something about this? But if they come in, "Oh, animals, neat," and then they meet a goat, like Sheldon, or the rooster, a toddler affectionately named Harry Styles because of his ridiculous hairdo, or a rabbit, Billy, or a Brody that's sitting there long enough for the toddler to see it and study it. If I let them sit there and soak it in and enjoy it and just see them as creatures and personalities, it's Sheldon, it's Coco, it's Amos, it's a someone. Suddenly, it's not just livestock anymore, and they're not just on a farm. And then when they have connected and once they have affection, I don't need to burden them with facts per se. They're going to want them organically. So they love Sheldon, right? And they thought they heard me say, "Wait, did you say he's endangered? Where are they from? Wait, what? So what happens if they could go extinct?" I have seen countless moments of information landing because the connection opened the door first. They came to the farm to see animals because they like animals. They didn't maybe know they cared. I helped bridge that gap by leaning in on the emotion first, or just letting it happen on its own. Come to the water and your body will tell you how to drink. That was long-winded, right? I'm in a mood. So how do we get from animals are kind of cool to I will sign a petition, I will vote a certain way, I will donate my money to keep these species around? How do we get there? Well, the research keeps coming back to three main ingredients. The first, early experiences in nature. A 2020 review by Louise Chawla, looked at studies from around the world and found that frequent positive contact with nature in childhood, especially unstructured play, is one of the strongest predictors of environmental concern and conservation action in childhood. It doesn't have to be a national park. It can be a farm like Dalby. Toddler time, we have advocacy pathway programs in the works, things like that. Or even a scruffy lot with bugs, a backyard with a clump of trees, even balcony plants that kids are allowed to water and care for. I mean it. What matters is that children get to notice and touch and feel nature like they're a part of it, rather than feeling like they're visitors to a museum. A 2021 study also found that family values, social norms, and everyday experiences of nature all contribute to how strongly kids later feel connected to the natural world. So if you bring your toddler to feed our goats and let them collect the eggs or show them milkweed bugs in the garden, you are helping to rewire their future relationship with the planet. And it's not pressure. You should want to do this. It does feel like pressure, I guess, but you should still try. We all should try in the face of high pressure, no matter what it is. But okay, I'm rambling again. The second ingredient that is a theme I've already touched on here is the empathy with nature. So, in other words, can you imagine what it's like to be that animal, that river, that forest? Can you imagine? When people are invited to take an animal's perspective, which I do way too much, especially an animal being harmed, when people are allowed to actually consider what the animal's experience is, right? The concern for the entire ecosystem actually does increase. A 2025 study published in Journal of Environmental Psychology found that empathy with nature strongly predicted conservation behavior and intentions, especially when it came to publicly supporting policies and community actions, not just like private recycling. That's from also Science Direct. And a 2025 paper on zoo visitors showed that when people felt a sense of connection and empathy towards specific species at the zoo, they were more likely to say those animals needed protection and to support conservation measures around them. So, yeah, this is where names and stories really do come in. If I tell you heritage chicken breeds are endangered, that's information. But if I tell you, this is Coco, she's an Australorp chicken, and her breed nearly vanished because industrial agriculture only wanted one hyper-efficient egg layer. Well, isn't that a story your heart sort of latches into? You're looking at this beautiful chicken, and it like hurts to consider the idea that she's not wanted because she doesn't lay eggs hyper efficiently. So she doesn't deserve to live on the planet, just so you know. That's the implication there. But we think in stories, so we donate. I won't even talk about Sarah McLachlan, right? When we think of donating, I say Sarah McLachlan. Do I need to say anything else? But we vote. We volunteer because of stories, not spreadsheets. And the last big ingredient is the sense of place. Again, I've mentioned this. Conservation isn't just about animals. It is about places, too. Ones that feel and should feel like a part of us. A 2023 study looking at a documentary series called Fight for the Wild found that anchoring conservation narratives in specific landscapes with local voices talking about their valleys and rivers, well, it created a powerful engagement that moved people toward action. This was Taylor and Francis Online. And agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have started to explicitly talk about sense of place in climate adaptation. When people feel deeply attached to their home landscapes, well, they're more willing to adapt, organize, and support the long-term conservation and resilience efforts around it. You know what I mean, though. We care because it's affecting us, and that's like narcissistic human behavior at its finest, but it is what it is. So when we say, save the wetlands, that's very abstract. But when a lobsterman says, hey, if this marsh goes, my grandfather's dock, my daughter's memories, and our whole way of life go with it, well, that is place attachment, that is identity, that is love. And good chances are, that local community's not letting that happen once that is known. So what are emotions doing for conservation besides making us cry at nature docs or dog rescue commercials? That is the answer to the Sarah McLachlan thing, if you didn't know what I meant earlier. For a long time, conservation tried very hard to be strictly rational. Here are the numbers. Here is the extinction risk. Here's the cost-benefit analysis. And then people still, I don't know, they didn't change. Or if they did, they're not enough. More recent work has argued that we need to stop pretending we're just brains with legs and admit that emotions are doing much of the heavy lifting. A 2020 paper literally titled "The Importance of Human Emotions for Wildlife Conservation" pointed out that emotions like fear, awe, disgust, and affection, as well as compassion, all strongly shape which animals people want to protect and which ones they're apparently okay erasing. Another 2021 article argued that emotions like compassion can be a legitimate source of moral insight in conservation. It's not something to get over, but rather something to pay attention to. That's the Andrews Forest Research Program. So in plain language, if you feel sick at the idea of a species disappearing forever, that is not you being, quote, too sensitive. That's your nervous system noticing that something is wrong. That is my little, well, I'm not going to get into anxiety in this episode, but ... At the same time, researchers have found that you can't just scare or guilt people into caring. A 2025 review on why people do or don't protect nature suggests that hope, efficacy, and identity matter. They're going to be more likely to act in favor of any cause when they're emotionally connected, actually able to do something that helps, and, you know, when it's action that fits who they are and whatever group they think they belong to. Which, I mean, I guess it kind of brings me to one of my favorite parts of this whole topic, which is our "while we're at it" section, and how love is a strategy, right? So there are 5 quick ways that emotion drives conservation. So we're going to do a lightning round of how love and attachment are already being used, in fact, sometimes quietly, to protect the living world. Okay? So the first one is the charismatic spokes animals. Pandas, sea turtles, monarch butterflies, even certain shark species, they have become the poster children. People will connect to one recognizable, lovable species, and that opens the door to funding whole ecosystems. And then there's naming individual animals, right? Research on empathy with nature shows that when people see animals as individuals with names and stories, it is undeniable that their willingness to protect them goes up. This shows up in adoption programs, zoo ambassadors, and farms that introduce you to Pickles and Pablo, the Ossabaw Island hogs, rather than just a pig. Granted, we don't just name ours. Our animals are actual individuals with personalities and names and stories. That's not just for you to care. That's because we care. But anyway, next. Place-based storytelling. That's third. Projects that frame conservation as protecting our bay, our mountain, our community forest. It taps into that sense of place. When people see their own memories and livelihoods bound up in a landscape, they will push harder to keep it intact. The fourth is heritage breeds as living heritage. So groups like the Livestock Conservancy, I will mention them probably in every episode. Heritage farms like ours, we use the emotional pull of history and culture. That's probably how you found this podcast episode right now. So we love to say these sheep might have come from the sheep your great-great-grandparents might have known. Like, we love to get people invested in preserving rare livestock. At the same time, emphasizing the practical genetic diversity these breeds carry, like heat tolerance, parasite resistance, good mothering traits, harsh weather adaptations, ability to drink salt water. There's so many different random genetic diversity traits that you can hook people into with further once they already have their foot in the door of caring. And then, of course, this one feels almost wrong, right? But the truth is that children have also become pretty significant change makers. Us environmental educators have noticed that when kids fall in love with a place or a species, guess who they drag into the conversation? They're adults. So childhood nature connection has been linked not only to adult concern, but to a kind of constructive hope, a belief that things can still get better, which is so crucial for not giving up. My gosh, we cannot just be, this podcast would be awful if I was just telling you in my monotone, sad, miserable voice how bad things are and how nothing will get better. Love it isn't just a nice side effect. It is quietly doing tons of the organizing work. Let's bring this back to something very close to home, heritage breeds. On paper, heritage livestock conservation is about genetics and food security. The Livestock Conservancy describes heritage breeds as reservoir of genetic diversity that can help agriculture adapt to things like new diseases, changing climates, shifting farm systems. I feel like I name 3 different things every time I bring this up, but the parasite resistance and the ability to thrive on rough forage and tolerance for heat and cold, which it's stronger in the old breeds than in the few hyper-selected industrial lines that dominate our food system today. And I want that just to be out there and known and recognized. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that being clear. Since we know that these breeds are reservoirs of diversity, and up to half of a breed's biodiversity may not be found anywhere else in the species, then to lose them is losing an exact trait. I feel like we'll wish we had 30 years from now. And that's the rational argument. But if I walk into the yard and say to a visitor, these are Arapawa Island goats, these are Ossabaw Island hogs, and they are on the edge of disappearing. They have names, they have histories, they have personalities, they nudge my pockets for treats, they headbutt fence posts, and their ancestors kept families alive in hard times. I think that lands very differently. And like I said, people want to know, well, how many are left? Who's keeping track? How do I help? The science gives us the why, but the relationships give us the will. And this is where your farm or your local sanctuary or your favorite little patch of woods can quietly become a conservation classroom without ever even saying the words biodiversity index. You just introduce people to the animals. You just tell the stories and you let the connection do its work. If all of this is true, then I think it also explains something much harder. Why it is so easy for people to disregard some animals, some ecosystems, and not others. Research on why people don't protect nature points to a few patterns when nature feels distant, abstract, reduced to numbers, associated with guilt, or framed as someone else's problem. People disconnect, they shut down, they move on. Urbanization and screen-based lives mean many people rarely have direct contact with wild animals or working landscapes. If every animal you see is in a meme or a cartoon, it is much harder to feel the reality of its loss. On top of that, a lot of conservation messaging has leaned heavily on fear. Everything is collapsing. We have 10 years left. This is your fault. Urgency has its place. I get that. But for many people who are already in their own constant crises, right? This kind of talk will backfire into numbness or worse, defensiveness. They feel overwhelmed already, powerless already, quietly ashamed already. They may not even know that, but it's there. None of those states are great for sustained action or for activating concern. The newer conversations in conservation psychology are moving toward a different mix. So we will tell the truth about the stakes, but we're going to anchor it in love, place, and possibility. We're going to show people that their actions do matter and connect it to identities that they feel proud of, like a good parent, a good farmer, a good neighbor, a good ancestor. In other words, we don't protect what we don't feel connected to. So the work is to build, or some may argue, restore the connection. So you're listening to this, right? You're here. You're probably one of a dozen people who clicked play on this episode as we sit here in January of 2026. I don't know where this will go or who it will reach later, but I know there's about a dozen of you that reliably show up. So there's a good chance that you already care. You don't need the convincing that animals matter or that ecosystems are in trouble. But I bet you're tired. And I bet you feel like nothing you do is enough. And if you're like me, you look at your finances and your cortisol and your own life, and saving the world feels like, boop, one more item on that impossible list. So let's keep it small and human-sized, or maybe even Meme the black cat at my feet sized. Here are a few ways to apply all of this without moving to a cabin and becoming a full-time activist. And the first one is you can protect your own relationship with nature. I think it might be the most important one. The research is very consistent. When people feel connected to nature, they're more likely to get involved. They're going to act. They also report better mental health and greater feelings of meaning. I can vouch for that too. So your walks, your time in the barn if you go to one, your gardening, your bird watching, your little moments of I see you tree are not frivolous. They are literal maintenance for your empathy system. If you've been feeling numb or hopeless, your job is not to binge more bad news. It is to go reintroduce yourself to something alive. Next, make it specific. So, general messages like save the oceans or protect biodiversity are honestly hard for our brains to hold and or digest. So, something concrete like a specific river, a park or shoreline, maybe a specific breed or species, a literal farm, a existing wildlife rehab center. Like, learn the story, go visit it, donate, support how you can, tell other people about it. We act for what feels like ours. So make it specific. I will always suggest this one from firsthand experience and as someone who's just grown up on this farm. Let kids fall in love first and then give them the facts. Parents, teachers, aunts, uncles, farm friends. Remember that the wonder phase comes before the here's how it's bad talk, right? You know this from your own lived experience. Research on childhood nature connection suggests that wonder, play, and affection lay the foundation for constructive concern later. So let them name the chickens. Let them feed the goats. Let them build weird little fairy houses under the pine trees. And then, when they ask bigger questions, and you answer honestly, don't skip the part where you show them what people are doing right, okay? You can't forget that part. You can include the dark, but don't forget the light. The reality is, I end up saying something like this in every single episode. So maybe that just simply underlines how important it is. But you don't need to move to a cabin. You don't need to go off the grid. You can simply support the people and places that are already doing the slow work. We don't need everybody to be a biologist. I mean, I don't mind if there's more farms or anything, run more conservation things. Obviously, we love that. But the most conservation wins actually come from a mix. It has to be local community members, policy changes, scientists, educators, donors, volunteers. If there's a place or species you love, you can look up the people that are quietly keeping it alive and see what they need. And sadly, it's usually money. They didn't make the rules, though. Sometimes it's showing up to a town meeting and saving that lot from being turned into another parcel of 40B units. Yeah? And sometimes it's just sharing the work of these people, of these farms. Share this podcast. Find videos about endangered goats. I don't know. Share. Explain. Relate. And last, simply allow yourself to care about unpopular animals and unglamorous landscapes. I mean, that is obviously harder to do and will not necessarily come natural, but if you're someone who's aware of it, maybe it's something you can actively change. Love is not a limited resource, but we know that attention is, right? It is easy to care about sea turtles and wolves and whales, I guess, but it's less obvious while still being just as important to care about things like soil microbes. I'm laughing again because I know what the general reaction to these things are. Marsh grass, scrubby urban lots where pollinators live. That is an under-discussed topic. I'm making a mental note to come back to pollinators in general, though. Spring is coming. It'll be here. Old sheep breeds and unfancy chickens alike are all just as important to care about. Harder to reach the masses with the unfancy chicken, though. But you don't need the world's permission either, do you? To love something small or unknown or almost extinct. There are no rules here. You can set those rules. Often, those are the things keeping the rest of the system standing. So, jump in. When I walk out on the farm, and it's a gray New England day, none of the animals are thinking about conservation psychology. The Arapawa Island goats are thinking about whether I brought good hay. The Ossabaw Island pigs are thinking about the pumpkin I owe them. Where's the pumpkin? Chickens are thinking whatever chickens think when they stare and run at you and then wander off. I don't know. They don't know they're rare. They don't know their breeds carry genetic traits that might matter decades from now. They don't know they're part of a story. We're the ones telling the stories. We are the ones deciding what gets remembered, what gets protected, and what disappears. That's terrible to be in that position. The part that both haunts and comforts me is that we can't equally care about everything. Our hearts are not built that way. But I don't know that we have to. Because every time we deeply love something, a farm, a coastline, a city park, a scruffy little goat with weird horns, that love does spill over. And it does change how we see everything else, even if we're not knowing it as it's happening. Again, the research language calls it nature connectedness and pro-environmental behavior. I remember, I call it remembering that we are not separate. It's true. Jacques Cousteau was right. People protect what they love. His grandson extends it. People protect what they love. They love what they understand. They understand what they're taught, right? So if we want the future where more species make it through, where more breeds hang on, where more kids grow up into adults who still feel something when a bird disappears from the sky, we're going to have to do all three. We're going to have to teach We have to help people understand. And then we have to be brave enough to let ourselves love the places and creatures that might break our hearts a little. I don't say that lightly. 50% of my life in this work has been heartbreak. But here on the farm, it looks like toddlers feeding grain or scratch to animals when they can barely see over the fence. It looks like adults who just came for the kids, but find themselves lingering by the goat stall and asking all these questions and wondering all these things they did not expect to care about. And then, you know what? Looks like you, listening to a podcast about conservation on a Wednesday when life is already a lot. But the good news is that you don't have to fix everything. You have to keep your heart open to one patch of the world, one flock, one herd, one stretch of coastline, one city tree at a time. Because if you love it, you'll protect it. And that's how change actually starts. Okay? Thank you very much for being with me again. This is the 31st episode I think I've recorded, or maybe it's the 32nd. I can't keep track anymore, but we've been here for a minute, so thanks for joining. We got this. Until next time, take care. If you enjoyed this episode, please share, leave a comment, maybe a question I can answer in a future episode. Subscribe to the channel, you know the whole deal. And of course, you can visit dalbyfarm.com. We do ship nationwide. Our country store has something for everybody. So I hope, and please know that all purchases, I believe it's at least 50% of each and every purchase goes directly back to the care and upkeep of this family farm. So we thank you very much. I hope this finds you well, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and don't forget to appreciate the rare and wonderful things in life.